using some of the more neutral textures and materials to define spaces as a backdrop. You can see a little bit of the wood expression above the holding lounge ceilings that we're borrowing also from Terminal D. Not only using those architectural type of features and textures to create an environment, but also using some of the other things that we feel are working well at Terminal D, bringing in light. You can see in the upper right-hand corner there's a suggestion of a skylight. That's being looked at in the Skylink node areas of Terminal A to bring in some natural light. You all know that bringing in daylighting for not only terminal but for concession areas is a very enlivening and positive opportunity for any kind of concessions activity. As well as the ceiling height. You can see here there's a suggestion that there's a little bit more height in those terminal areas, particularly in the concourse. We've pushed those ceilings up as much as we feel will work with the mechanical and other concerns that are going to be housed in those ceilings. And you can see here, in the same way, perhaps not as dramatically as in Terminal D with this gigantic volumetric space, but in the same manner, we're creating a volume over that concourse area of the terminal to create an intuitive sense of wayfinding. This is the way you go down the concourse. There's no confusion. This is the path you go down, and creates a street upon which things like concessions are going to occur and clarify some of those issues for travelers. So a lot of those same strategies in Terminal D, creating a relifed terminal experience in Terminal A would, in our opinion, bring together an environment that not only speaks to Terminal D, but uses many of the successful techniques of Terminal D, particularly in relation to concessions. We also chose not to fight with the very strong structural language in Terminal A. Again, that heavy concrete. We, at one point, considered perhaps choosing an expression that was covering it up. But if you did that, you'd obviously have to drop your ceilings down and lose a lot of spatial opportunities. So we said, let's work with that structure and see what it can bring us. It has a very strong geometric presence. Maybe that's something that can work. And you can see here in this slide, we're picking up on that language of the very, very bone and muscular structure of that architecture to create a rhythm for the internal terminal language that is reflected in both the ceiling and in many ways also in the artery wall or the terminal walls that you see there. So what does that mean for you guys? Great, the terminal looks nice, it's clear. How does that affect a concession space? You can see here in this diagram, and I'm going to skip ahead here quickly, the entire concourse concessions are being shown on this map here, essentially in the horseshoe ring. It really is more of a mall-like experience, but a curved mall-like experience with, among other activities, the retail occupancies appearing along that path. And we looked a long time at how those might work into that terminal fabric and how they might best take advantage of the opportunities that we have there. And what we came up with, this is a section cutting through that concourse and looking at on the left a potential concession area, and on the right you're going to have a holding lounge that then opens out to the airfield. And what we looked at a lot of different opportunities of perhaps extending signage or concession areas out into that concourse. I'm going to drop back to this slide here, protruding their advertising areas out into that concourse. But we really felt, after looking at all those examples, that the primary objective of creating almost a very clean and clear visual corridor above the concourse would really be undermined by that. And while we felt that the concessions expression area was very important and needed to have a very strong presence on the concourse, perhaps that wasn't the best way of doing it. So what we ended up with was taking a look at that concessions presence itself on the concourse. And you can see here in this section, we've created a pocket, a cove-like area on either side of the concourse ceiling. And that gives us an opportunity to we're pushing our mechanical areas into the center of that ceiling, and it gives us an opportunity to extend the concessions expressions up into that pocket area in a manner that makes the whole environment seem higher and give the concessionaires a much larger presence and branding area on the concourse, and the ability to essentially show themselves, show their wares, show their signage to a much greater degree than is out there right now. I think right now it's at a 9-foot height, and that's very much driven by, you can see in our section here, there's a concrete girder that occurs in some locations in the terminal. It's very much driven by those circumstances. This design approach gives us the opportunity to have a 14-foot-6 presence on the concourse, so a much larger, greater presence on a cleaner and higher feeling concourse experience that really will enliven it for the traveling passengers. So this is really our main concessions, our primary concessions, of which we have the majority in this terminal. And you can see that in this plan we're calling the inline condition, but as I said before, it's really more of a mall-like experience. And we actually did a lot of renderings specifically just to look at our ideas for how the concessions might work in the terminal. And you can see here an illustration of all our strategies kind of coming together. You see a very clear, clean concourse area, well lit, potential for daylight coming in there, and really the concessions have a very strong and illustrative presence on that concourse. You can see the one area where we're proposing to have an expression that extends out beyond that concessions environment is right on that face in the form of a blade sign. And that idea, you can see even in the early renderings, was there. We've carried that through to our final design, I guess our concessions guidelines, to have a standardized blade sign that's associated with each retail occupancy, as well as that 14-foot-6 area that's defined by a neutral frame, which you can see in this illustration here. There's a metallic frame reminiscent of what you see in Terminal D, but obviously not on the same kind of scale, that defines the branding envelope of the concessionaire, as well as a concept that we've developed for that initial 4-foot area inside the retail environment that fronts the concourse, that we call an expression zone, or an intruding zone is the word I invented for it. And that really is conceived of as a space where retailers can not only show their signage, but also their wares and their theming colors and materials within that zone. And we've shown here a couple suggested examples of how that might work, because what we discovered is when we pull that area into that zone inside the neutral frame back in the store from the concourse, it really creates a draw from that concourse and an invitation into the store. Instead of having signage that leaps out at you and crowds the concourse, we actually have an opportunity for signage to draw people in, signage and wares to draw people into the concession storefront itself. This is another view. That view I showed you before is in the Skylink nodes, which are conceived of as a much higher concentration of concessions. And this view is in one of the more standard areas outside of the nodes. One of the key differences is the actual concrete columns have a little bit greater degree of exposure. The artery wall, the terminal wall that forms that edge of the concourse steps back slightly. But similar principles of a signage zone and expression zone on that concourse, the standard blade sign that's accompanying each of those retail occupancies, and that all occurring within a terminal architecture of a very clean and clear aesthetic, is a strategy that we're applying all the way throughout. So there'll be a very consistent message all the way through the terminal, very straightforward path to follow through the concourse to the gates, upon which a concessionaire is reading in a consistent manner, and the visitor, the individual, is going to experience that. That's going to pick up on that in a very intuitive and clear way, and understand exactly where everything lies. I spoke before about the Skylink nodes and there being a stronger concessions presence there. There's also some slight differences in concessions in those areas as well. As opposed to being a mall-like experience, I think there's some slightly different opportunities there for our retail opportunities. As opposed to the concession side of the concourse side of the terminal, where we have